Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name is Glenn Keller, and in this video we are continuing on with our using Active Workspace topics. So in the previous video, if you're watching these in order, we talked about logging into Active Workspace, signing out, and browser mobility concepts, as well as looking at our profile options that we had. In this video, we are diving a little bit deeper with that, and we're going to start looking at some use cases to help you along your way with your profile. So we've already spoken about accessing our profile and working with that data, but let's go ahead and look at what interacting with that data means for you. So first of all, let's go into Manage Profile here in the top right. And in the Manage Profile, we have a lot of different options in here. Depending on your use case, your customer environment, you may or may not use all of these features. In the top up arrow location, this dot in the top corner, you have New, Edit, Manage, Share, View, Import, Export. You may have more, you may have less, but this is generally where a lot of the tools to interact with this data are located. And if you choose Edit, notice that you can edit the current page, and you can do things like this against data in the system as well. If I choose New, notice I could generate reports against the data. Manage, I could change password or my location code. Sharing, I could copy a link or forward tasks. Viewing, I don't have any options for here. And then importing and exporting, I don't have any options for. So in here, I'm going to start with editing. I'm a new user in the system, and I'm just going to go ahead and pick my geography. So in this case, if I come in, we've got US is where I'm based, so I'm going to choose that. Then I'm going to come down and look at my default group. So in this case, I do have multiple groups and roles. So I have two different groups, and what I want to set for my default group is the group that I log in the most frequently with. I don't want to have to come in here, log in, and immediately change my group every single time I come in. So in here, I'm going to say that engineering is the group that I log in with the most, and I'm going to just ensure that engineering is selected for the default group. Default volume is usually controlled by your administrators. So the only reason that you would ever need to switch this is if you were traveling to another location, a geographic location like to another country, and your company may have a different volume that they want you to save to if you're working in that country. Volumes are essentially just a file location that the data is stored, and your company may have multiple volumes. But again, unless you're told so, I wouldn't update this. Engineering and DBA. There are default roles for both of these. Now, in my case, if I look at my engineering and I pull this down, I only have one role. So my default role will be that role. But I could say that I want my default role to be that role just in case I am added to additional roles. So again, when you log in, it will default to the engineering group and that role. If I log in as DBA, I want the DBA role to be the default role. Now again, you don't have to set these. I only come in and set these if it's going to be an issue for me in the future, or if I'm seeing some issues with performance, having to flip between those groups. Surrogates we'll talk about more when we get into workflow discussions, but surrogates give you the ability to say, hey, I'm going to stand in, or somebody is going to stand in for me to perform tasks in the workflow process. And there are two types of this type of thing. There are surrogates, which give you access to their inbox, and there's out of office, which essentially just sends their tasks to you. So we'll get into this, but you could set these up right now by hitting Add Surrogate, selecting your date range that you want that to be a surrogate for, and then clicking Add to actually select an individual to assign as a surrogate. Same for resource pool subscriptions, or not the same for that, but resource pool subscriptions also interact with workflows, and we'll talk more about it when we get there. but you can add subscriptions to resource pools. Once we get to workflows, we'll talk about why we don't necessarily need to do this anymore. But for this display, we've already spoken about the profile photo as well, so make sure you update one if you're told to. There is also this data share manager, which we'll get into in more elaborate components. If you haven't been told anything about this, just leave this be. Notifications, so you can dictate whether you get an email notification when you subscribe to objects. For instance, like if you are going to subscribe to be told whenever something is checked out or released. So do you get it in a news feed? Do you get an email and the news feed, or do you just get an email? I like both. So I'm going to just make sure I'm aware of what's happening. And then do I want it daily and weekly digests? Absolutely. Do I want to retain that information? How many days? Maybe 3 days. I want to retain that information in the news feed. So, and then finally, units as like inches, meters, yards, those types of units. Notice that the unit display will be applied to the parameters and weight and balance options. So metric or non-metric display sets, as authored, basically falls back onto the default configuration that your admins have given you. Once you make modifications to this, just go ahead and come into the edit and say save edits up at the top. So at this point, we have now completed modifying those settings in our display. Now, if I wanted to, if I'm not using smart card authentication or something like that, then I could go in and change my password, which we'll do in the next step. In order to change your password, you need to come to this display, and then you can hit the ... and say manage. Change password. So if you do this, then you'll need to provide your current password, and then you can provide your new password. And then confirm the new password. It will tell you if it doesn't match, and then click change to change that password, and you'll get a little notification that says it's been changed. You won't be able to do this if you have smart card authentication or other means. So in here, I've now changed my password, I've set my profile display, and then if I do a search in here, I come up to the top, I'm going to do a search for I'm going to do a search for cutter. I have a cutting head assembly in my database, and I just need to identify it. So in this case, I'm going to come in and perform a search and find 09 star as the item ID for that search. And I'm just going to go ahead and open this assembly. Now, if you have your own data, make sure you grab an assembly that represents your data. But what we're doing here is we're just opening something to take a look at some examples on how your group and role settings can be applied and seen or interact with things in the system. So right here, I have a bunch of data. In this case, it's an assembly. And over here on the right-hand side, it tells me who the owning user and the group are. And based on that, because I'm in the engineering group and not in the DBA group, depending on your permissions in the system, if I come in here and I were to try and do that edit, notice that I can choose Edit Summary to edit the properties on this. And that's because I have that other group available to me in this system. So everything that you can do in the system is dictated on those groups, and you may need to request additional access to that.